Hey everybody, my name is Liz Newton and I am an occupational therapy student at Creighton University. I am currently completing my doctoral capstone at Colorado Springs Therapy Center here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And what my capstone is focused on is parent education and sensory integration. So I have decided to create a bunch of YouTube videos to kind of describe what sensory integration is, sensory processing as well, kind of what interventions OT does to help kids with sensory processing difficulties, how it impacts so many different aspects of children's lives, and what you as parents can do to help your kiddos at home overcome any of those sensory challenges that they may have. So at Colorado Springs Therapy Center, we treat a whole bunch of diagnoses, including inattention, maybe some difficulty with fine motor skills. Sometimes that can present as, just some difficulty with in-hand manipulation, or it can be handwriting difficulties that a child may struggle with. We also look at behavioral challenges, gross motor difficulties, including balance and coordination, some difficulties completing activities of daily living, such as dressing, tying shoes. We look at socialization, if a child has difficulty with some picky eating, or maybe they're not getting enough nutrients that they need, seeing if there are some kind of other components behind that we can address. And there's so many other things that we address too at Colorado Springs Therapy Center and as occupational therapists, but I could talk all day about all the different kinds of things that we are able to do. So with that being said, all of these diagnoses, all of these difficulties that children may have that we can treat, a lot of times parents don't realize that some of these things can really be sensory based in nature. You may be like, okay, so then what is sensory processing exactly? How does that affect my kid? How is that affecting all these things, that my child may have difficulty with? And maybe you have heard of sensory processing or sensory integration from your physician or your occupational therapist or somebody at school for your kiddo. But sensory processing and sensory integration can be very difficult to understand, even though they may seem pretty simple. You may have seen, some fun activities on Pinterest or Instagram that kind of have sensory processing or sensory integration components, like, oh, here's a cool sensory box for my kid. But what is that sensory box really doing for your kid, and what does it mean, and how is it really specifically going to help your child? And that is what I'm here to do, is to kind of help explain some of that and try to get away any of that confusion that you may be having or questions that you may have about sensory processing. So I'm going to make a series of YouTube videos that kind of talk about that, how we can address it as OTs and what you guys can do as parents to help. Okay, so let's break down all of the senses first. So there's actually 8 senses that occupational therapists look at. Not 5, not 6, but 8. And all these senses can impact a child's functioning in play, socialization, self-care, eating, and even sleeping. So I'm going to show you guys a little presentation really quick to kind of give you a better visual of what all of these systems are. Okay, so now I'm going to go through all 8 systems of our sensory processing system and give you a little bit of background information about each of them. So the first sensation that we're going to talk about is taste. Taste is the sensation in your mouth when you eat food. You can have the taste of salty, sweet, bitter, sour, and umami, which is like a savory flavor. And taste is a protective sense that tells us what's safe and unsafe to eat and drink. But not only does taste include what you're tasting and the foods that you're having, but it also includes that oral sensory processing, which is referring to the textures of the food and drink that we put into our mouths. So this could be rough, smooth, crunchy, chewy, hard, soft, slimy, or dry. When we are thinking about using our mouth too, some sensations that we do, such as sucking and chewing, can actually give us a very calming sense. The next sense is the sense of smell, or olfactory processing. And this is what occurs when tiny molecules in the air enter our body and react with our olfactory receptors in our nose and mouth that link directly to the olfactory nerve in the brain to produce our sense of smell. So the olfactory bulb in our brain actually connects to the limbic system, which is responsible also for emotion, alertness, and aggression. So smells can trigger memories and emotion, both good and bad, and smells can also be a protective mechanism for safety to allow us to know when something is not safe to eat, or it'll allow us to locate our food. It'll allow us to know when there's a toxic chemical around, etc. So that next sense is vision, and vision is the process that converts light energy into meaningful images within our brain to produce what we see in the world around us. There are many different components of our visual system and many visual processing skills that are key to helping us function in daily activities. Our visual processing systems have to constantly work to filter visual information out surrounding us at all times. So it tells us what information is important in the moment and what we can ignore. It can help us discriminate between different objects, different sizes, different shapes, and it'll help us perceive where objects are in space as well, and remember visual information such as letters and numbers so that we can recognize them for tasks such as reading and writing. So next I'm going to talk about auditory processing, and this is how we perceive sounds and identify them as recognizable words, melodies, or noises through vibrations or changes in pressure. There are many characteristics of auditory processing, such as volume, tone, timbre, and duration, that allow us to discriminate and detect and also interpret sounds in our environment. So that can include interpreting information that people are telling us and storing it into memory for later use. Our auditory system is able to filter out necessary and unnecessary auditory information that we hear, and when we need to direct our attention to other things, so like a person or a task at hand. So we can filter out that any kind of auditory information going on in the background and just solely focus on what we are hearing in the here and now that is the most important. So the next sensory system that we're going to talk about is tactile processing, and this is how our bodies interpret information from our sense of touch throughout our body. So it's not just in our hands, it's everywhere on our body to help us feel safe and secure in our environment. This will include light touch, deep touch. It can include some pressure, temperature, and vibration. It'll allow us to feel comfortable wearing clothes, recognize objects with our vision occluded, know what the temperature is for appropriate temperature regulation. It'll help us feel textures and can make a positive emotional connection with others. Like if you give somebody a hug, that can be a great emotional response that tactile processing can contribute to. The next sensation that we're going to talk about is proprioception. So this is the body's ability to sense movements, actions, and location in space. So that includes the receptors in your joints, skin, and muscles that tell you your body and your brain where you are in space without you having to look. It'll tell you how much pressure you can put on a pencil or how much strength to use for lifting items and how to coordinate your movements. Next we have the vestibular system, which acts as a foundation actually for all of the other sensory systems and is crucial for development. So this system is the part of the body that provides us with our sense of balance and helps us coordinate our movements. It helps us with control of our eyes, and it helps with bilateral coordination. So this will help us maintain postural control in addition to that proprioceptive input that we get. And then vestibular will also help us move in multiple planes without falling over. It can also help us tolerate motion. So if we're in a car, and the car is moving, it'll help us tolerate that sensation so that we don't feel sick. It also helps keep our heads aligned. So last but not least is the Interreceptive System. This system is not always recognized when discussing sensory systems. However, it is very important, and all of the sensory systems work with interoception to work functionally. So this system allows us to feel our internal organs and sensations that keep us at homeostasis. It helps us recognize like when we need to go to the bathroom, when we're hungry, when we're thirsty, and it also can help us feel emotions or do activities that cause our heart to beat really quickly. It helps us when we're stressed. It'll maybe have us clench our teeth or tighten our muscles. Sometimes our fingers can go kind of numb if we're cold, and this is that interoceptive system telling our body what its response needs to be in order to handle these situations. It also allows us to feel pain and perceive pain and when we feel sick. So again, this system is extremely important and not often talked about, but should be talked about more.
And then here are the references that I used.
So now that we know what all of the senses are and what they do, let's talk about what sensory processing disorder actually means. All right, so according to the Star Institute, sensory processing and integration is foundational to healthy development, function, participation, learning, and psychological well-being. And that is a quote directly from the Star Institute, which is actually based here in Denver, Colorado. This means that if you are not able to filter necessary sensory information appropriately, you might find yourself getting really easily distracted or experiencing pain or discomfort with certain activities. You may experience aversion to certain food or textures of clothing. You may have difficulty calming down or focusing, etc. And all of these components can really impact our daily lives and activities. So let's think about it this way, okay? Have you ever felt the need that you just have to move, or you have to work out before you can sit down and complete a project at work, or maybe complete some paperwork that you have to do for a kid, some of your bills, anything that you have to just sit down and focus on for a while? Maybe you feel like you really need to move before that so that you have that ability to sit there and focus. Or have you ever felt like you needed to chew on a piece of gum? Or I play with my hair a lot, right? A pencil, maybe you're playing with an object at your desk to concentrate. Maybe you have to, do some kind of fidget to focus on and take a test, and that's just how you cope with it. And maybe you're not even aware that you're doing some of these things, but you are, and that's how you are sitting there and able to focus on the task at hand. Perhaps you need to listen to music or wear some headphones, even just to block out any kind of noise that's around you, because it's really bothering you and you can't sit there and focus until you have those headphones in. Maybe you get overwhelmed by a cluttered house, or you feel like you need some kind of white noise to sleep. Maybe you enjoy smelling essential oils before you go to bed, and that really helps calm you down and make you feel ready to go to sleep, right? So that's your sensory processing system telling you all these things to keep you safe, keep you functioning normally, and allow you to do the things that you really want and need to do to live a normal life, right? Well, it's the same way for kids, but kids don't have that capacity to process and understand this and to handle it appropriately at times, especially if they, don't really know what is going on with their sensory system, and maybe they don't have the tools that they need to fulfill those sensory needs, okay? Perhaps a child becomes really overwhelmed with loud noises. They're always have to cover their ears, or they're really bothered, okay? Maybe that kid does not know, what kind of mechanisms can I do? What kinds of things can I tell my parents that bother me about these loud noises or these things that are going on, right? So the kid reacts by what a lot of kids do when they're overwhelmed. They cry, they get frustrated, they scream, they get upset. And that can be expected, right? Because something is going on that's really bothering them or causing them actual pain, in their sensory system that they cannot control, right? So those are some of examples of things that kids may have difficulty with, and why you might be like, why is my kid reacting this way? Why are they acting so strange around this? What does it mean? How do they have such poor functioning with their handwriting? Why is their balance so off? Why does my kid get sick every time we go in the car, etc., right? So if our children are not able to process our senses correctly, how can they be expected to learn new things, right? A kid who needs to have movement breaks and run around the class because his sensory systems are not regulated can't be expected to learn brand new items of material that are being taught in the class until his sensory system is regulated. It's kind of that hierarchy of needs, right? If we are not eating, we're not drinking enough water, we're not sleeping well, etc., we'll be maybe kind of moody and cranky. Our relationships might not be that great, and we may not be able to get our work done as effectively because all of these other needs have not been met yet, right? So it's the same thing for sensory processing with kids. If those sensory needs are not being met, they cannot be expected to have a super great behavior, socialize appropriately, do any of their fine motor, gross motor coordination appropriately, or be able to learn. I mean, academic learning and executive functioning and all of these very high cognitive skills are really difficult to obtain until we have all of those other needs met.
And this is just a visual reiterating what I was just saying about having to have all of those sensory skills fulfilled and met at the bottom of that pyramid there in order for all of these other things to happen. So in the next couple of videos, I'm going to be going through a bunch of different interventions that you guys can do at home with your kids and things that we even do in the therapy clinic here to really help regulate all of those sensory systems. So if you have any questions about the content of this video, you are welcome to leave a comment or contact us at Colorado Springs Therapy Center if you have further questions.